Hello and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Wargaming. And today we are going to be continuing our series that focuses on tier rankings in Star Wars Legion. However, rather than focusing on units in a faction, we are going to begin taking a look at the various upgrade categories and the options you can take in them, with today's episode focusing on probably some of the most potent and sought after upgrades, which is going to be the Force upgrade slot that you will receive on your Jedi and Sith heroes. And much like our faction tier ranking videos, this will be a sort of living document that we will revisit as time goes by, as points costs are prone to change and new cards will be released. But with no further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it and take a look at our first upgrade card here. Going alphabetically, we have Anger. And this is a dark side power that, at 5 points, will allow you to gain an aim token each time you receive one or more wounds. And that basically means every time you are defending against an attack pool and you receive a wound, you will gain an aim token. And usually, throughout the span of a match, your Jedi hero will be receiving wounds unless you are absolutely crushing your enemies. So why do I have this card ranked so low at just a C? Well, there is some drawbacks to it. And probably the most notable drawback is that Jedi don't always really need aim tokens. Most of them have very impressive attack pools, which are often backed up by innate surges or ample access to surge tokens, which greatly diminishes the need for aim tokens. So unless your Jedi hero has a large amount of black dice or some white dice thrown in there, you're usually not going to be extremely concerned about getting aim tokens. Yes, they do help, but they're rarely a necessity like many other units' attack pools. On top of that, it is a conditional bonus that, with the exception of a few heroes, is wholly outside of your control as to when it triggers. And that honestly just means there's more of a chance for this to trigger when you don't need the aim token. And with this card, there's a sort of duality where the more it triggers, the more likely you are to not make use of it, as your hero is likely going to die. Now, the obvious outliner to this card is going to be Darth Maul, and it kind of feels like it's almost tailor-made for him and him alone. But I could see it being somewhat useful on a character like the Emperor or maybe Dooku due to his Force Lightning ranged attack. So in the end, I think this is a card that works very well on Darth Maul, but doesn't really earn its place on any other heroes. It's really not a terrible card, but again, we're going to be grading on a kind of bias here, as the Force power upgrades are very potent and sought after, and there's just far better options, even at that 5-point cost to put in, than something like Anger. And if this card was something like a command upgrade or a training upgrade, it would probably be A or even S tier. But it's just not that. It is a card that is relegated to dark side powers only, and can only be thrown on heroes that more or less usually have very good dice, that don't need aim tokens quite as much. So definitely a C tier from me. But that will move us along to our next card, which will be Battle Meditation. And for 5 points, this card is going to allow you, when you're issuing a command on the battlefield, to issue one order to a friendly unit rather than the unit specified on the card. So let's say you throw down your 1-pip card that has just Anakin Skywalker on it, and you have Battle Meditation, you can instead push that activation onto a nearby Clone Trooper squad or perhaps something like a Saber tank. And this card is going to be, unfortunately, a D from me. I think it is one of the least taken Force upgrades. While that flexibility and command cards is very cool, and once again would be extremely useful in a lot of other upgrade options, it just doesn't really mesh with Jedi that well. First of all, one of the best things you can do for your order pool is to get those commander and operative tokens out of there and have them face up so you don't have to risk pulling them at the wrong time, and pushing that order off of your commander or operative onto some other units usually isn't your best play, especially when you consider, like the scenario I mentioned earlier, those 1-pip cards are usually the ones you're playing when it's do or die time with your hero, and they need to be first to strike or act against an enemy unit. After that, when you're generally looking at command cards in Star Wars Legion, 95% of the time they're either distinguishing their orders between heroes themselves, trooper units, or units in general. So let's break that down. Units themselves, like the heroes, are more or less always the ones who want to be getting face-up order tokens, again to get that hero token out of your pool, be it operative or commander, and then activate first because they usually are the star of your list. So there's really no point to essentially comms relay that order off of your hero, at least most of the time. Next we have the distinction between trooper and units, which is the most common variation you see in command cards, especially in the 2 and 3 pips. And yes, it would be nice to take one of those trooper relegated activations and then put it onto something like a vehicle with linked targeting array, but then you come across another conundrum with this being a force power, which is something that only appears on Jedi or Sith heroes, and to put it bluntly, you're not going to run a list that is both heavy in Jedi heroes and then also large armored vehicles that are going to have imposing battlefield presence. That's just too many points to fit into a single list. In your standard game, you are not going to have someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi alongside a Saber tank, Count Dooku alongside an AAT, or Vader alongside an ATST. It's just too many points that will stretch your list far too thin. And really, vehicle lists are the most common way in which you're going to be using these comms relay sort of gimmicks to push your orders from your troopers onto other units, which are usually vehicles. And yes, there is the inverse scenario of that, where you have cards that target vehicles that you can push onto troopers, but that is far more rare, and paying 5 points just to do that usually isn't advantageous. In the long run, it's usually better just to take generic command cards, then pay extra points on your heroes to have them tweaked. But that will move us along to our next card, which is again going to be a dark side upgrade, and this will be Fear, a 3-point card that allows you to gain Demoralize 1, which after your rally step is going to allow you to push a suppression token onto an enemy unit at range 1 to 2. And this card is going to be another C ranking for me, coming in rather low. It is a very minor buff, but it is inexpensive and passive, and obviously synergizes very well in a suppression list. But when it comes to suppression, you kind of have to look at it this way. Will I be putting out more suppression tokens with one hero that has Demoralize 1? Or could I take those 160 to 200 points and invest in 3 more units, who will likely each be putting out a suppression token each turn, and pad out your overall board control and activations on top of that? Now, sure, that dynamic changes a little bit when you consider command cards on characters like Palpatine or Vader, but once you get into scenarios like that, something like Demoralize 1 on one of your units becomes rather insignificant. And you know what, sure, if you're at 797 points and you want to fill up those 3 points with something that's going to benefit your list, why not take Fear? But that kind of sums up this card in general. It's a sort of very minor afterthought upgrade that you're going to throw on should you have the extra points. But if this card is going to be the difference between taking another unit on the battlefield or perhaps an even better force upgrade, of which there are many, you will probably drop it. And unlike its light side counterpart, Hope, this is a card that only really slots into suppression lists. If you're not building your entire list around bundling suppression tokens onto an opponent, you will very rarely find a scenario in which this card can tap out an enemy and make them either lose an activation or run off the battlefield. On top of that, enemy troopers with suppression on them get cover 1. So if you're doling this out and failing to break your opponent's morale, you're effectively giving them a bonus here. And that all makes Fear a very situational card, and one that has a very, very subtle impact even in those situations. But moving on from Fear, we are going to have one of the newer upgrade cards that we've seen, and that is going to be Force Barrier, coming in at 10 points and being an exhaustible card. This card will allow you to block either 2 regular hit results or 1 critical result when defending against an attack, while within range 1 of the Force user. And I find that to be rather phenomenal. And this new card is going to earn the S tier ranking from me. Basically, you get to tap this card and the unit either gains the benefits of heavy cover or a dodge token with the outmaneuver keyword. It just has absolutely serious potential to stave off damage throughout the course of a game, and if you're using this strategically on a support commander, say someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi, your opponent's going to have some serious trouble whittling away at your army. Combine that with Master of the Force to untap this card at the end of every turn, and you can effectively negate 12 enemy hits throughout the course of a battle. And if you really finesse it and time your recovery actions properly, you can block up to 24 successful hits that your enemy rolls throughout the span of a match. And if you're playing something like Clones, for example, with red armor saves, statistically speaking, that's going to block 12 wounds. That's 3 Phase 1 Clone Trooper squads or 156 points. And that's obviously a highly optimistic scenario there, but look at it this way, even if you use this once and block 2 hits going on your Clone Troopers, you've effectively saved 1 Clone Trooper's life, which is 10 points on its own, justifying the presence of this card. But math hammer aside, when you look at this card, it's just a very useful option to have up your sleeve. Even if you tap it once, it can really help cover your troopers as they move across the battlefield, perhaps to capture an objective in the open, or move up and assault an enemy position. And the only real drawback to this card is the fact that it is relegated to another friendly trooper unit. That means only troopers can receive the benefits of this, not vehicles or anything else, and the hero cannot use it on himself. Still an absolutely S tier card in my opinion, and I would like to see what you guys think about it in the comments below, as I have yet to actually run a list with it, but am very much looking forward to doing so. But after that, we are going to have yet another dark side power that is going to be Force Choke. And this card is going to be 5 points, exhaustible, and this will be a free action that allows you to put a wound onto an enemy trooper unit at range 1, so long as they are not a commander or operative. And this card is going to come in at a low A for me, albeit an A in general. It's a card that seems almost too good to be true the first time you look at it, and gives you the vibes of Mortal Wounds from Warhammer 40k. But when you actually play it, it doesn't work out quite as well in execution, no pun intended, and that range 1 combined with exhaustible really limits the times throughout a battle in which you can pop this card. But at just 5 points, even if you do it once, you usually are justifying the points cost for it, as even the humble B1 battle droid is 5 points himself. And sure, if you're using Master of the Force, that can greatly increase the effectiveness of this card. But from my experience on the battlefield, when you're that close to your opponents, you really want those dodge tokens, and you will likely be using that Master of the Force to untap another Force upgrade, rather than focusing on choking out the nearby grunts. So while I do like this card, and I do find myself throwing it on a lot of my dark side heroes and their extra Force upgrade slots, it's rarely a priority card. And even when it does make it onto the roster, I usually don't prioritize untapping this card with my Master of the Force. And honestly, it's rare to see this card kill up to 3 troopers throughout the span of a match. Still, it is incredibly satisfying when you're 5 turns into the game, and you tap this card to kill off a nearby heavy weapon upgrade in an enemy trooper unit. So while this certainly is an A card, it does kind of fall into that luxury category, and I don't always find myself equipping it nowadays. But after that, we are going to have Force Guidance. And this card was recently dropped down to 5 points, which is very refreshing, as it is a free activation card that is exhaustible, and will give up to 2 friendly units at range 1 to 2 a Surge token. And this card will sit relatively comfortably in that B range area. It's not a great card, as Surge tokens aren't exactly that impactful. And as always, being exhaustible means you're going to need to either have Master of the Force or Recovery to use this a couple times and justify its presence. But again, there are just flat out better Force powers to use that Master of the Force on. And unless you're playing a serious support character who plans on doing a lot of recovery actions, you're probably not going to be getting the best value out of this card, especially when you consider that there's a lot of other ways to get more Surge tokens around the field, many of which exist in upgrade slots that are far more common than the Force power upgrade. Still, it is always nice to have an extra avenue to guarantee Surge tokens, especially if you are playing one of those original 2 factions, Rebels or Empire, as Surge tokens were introduced relatively later, and they just have a little bit less access to them. And again, here we have a card that would probably be higher ranked, perhaps even S tier, if it were in another more common upgrade slot, but there are better Force upgrades out there, and when you consider the fact that it is an exhaustible card, the competition for the slot only increases. And after Guidance, we are going to be moving along to Force Push, and this will be a 10-point exhaustible card, allowing you to make a free action that can move an enemy trooper unit at range 1, with a speed 1 move, even if they are engaged. So basically, you can tap this card and make an enemy make a speed 1 movement. And while I personally rarely find myself running this card, I definitely see its potential and rank it in at that S tier. Yes, at 10 points and exhaustible, it is relatively steep, but there is so much potential for game-winning plays with this card. Even if you're only tapping it once per game, you can potentially push your opponent out of cover and eliminate them, or shove them off of an objective at turn 5, allowing you to secure it for yourself, and thus victory alongside it. It's a very board control-oriented upgrade, but in the hands of a good commander, this 10-point upgrade can make way more of a battlefield impact than almost any other upgrade card in the game. It's extremely potent when used properly, and unlike most other exhaustible Force upgrades, you don't need to be constantly refreshing it in order to get your most points value out of it. I think one well-timed strategic use of Force Push could change the course of a game on a dime, meaning it's not necessarily competing with other exhaustible cards for that Master of the Force refresh. Instead, it's just a very powerful ace to have up your sleeve, and I'm sure many players would agree with me on that. And if you do, let me know any awesome game-winning plays you've had with Force Push in the comments below. But next up, we are going to have what is probably the most important upgrade for the Force Power slot, and that is going to be Force Reflexes. And at 5 points, you are going to have an exhaustible card that will give you a free dodge token. And this will 100% be an S tier ranking card, as it is almost an auto-include for every Jedi that you run. And that's not simply because Jedi are expensive models who you want to keep alive with dodge tokens, but also because Jedi make use of the deflect keyword, in which they can spend dodge tokens to increase their defensive capabilities and potentially bounce wounds back onto their opponents. And having a card that you can tap even before your Jedi has activated to give them a dodge token ensures that you are always capitalizing on that, and will 100% help stave off more wounds. And really, this is the one card that your Master of the Force keyword is going to be untapping every turn, which means this card is arguably what devalues so many of the other exhaustible Force powers, as few of them benefit your overall battlefield presence as Force Reflexes does. So yeah, Force Reflexes is more or less the holy grail of Force upgrades, and if you don't know what to equip your Jedi with, you should probably start off with Force Reflexes and see where you can go from there. So with 3 cards ranking in at S tier already, you can see why this Force upgrade slot is so coveted. You just have some fantastic options here, and that makes a lot of the other options, which would be good in other upgrade slot scenarios, just very lackluster when they're on a Jedi. And that will be the scenario with our next card, which is going to be Hope. And Hope is a 3-point light side card that is the antithesis to Fear, granting you Inspire 1, which will remove a suppression token from a friendly unit at range 1 to 2 after your rally step. And this card is going to rank in at that mediocre tier of B, which is still 1 level above its counterpart Fear. And the reason behind that is because Hope is a much more utilitarian card than Fear, as Fear really needs to be used in a suppression list to reap the benefits of, but Hope is a very inexpensive failsafe card that will make sure that your units aren't losing activations or panicking, as you will be able to chip away and control those suppression tokens as they are doled out throughout the course of a match. It's just far less of an uphill battle to make this card work for you when compared to Fear, and again, at just 3 points, it's really not a bad upgrade to take when you're finished writing your list and you still have less than 5 points to work with, but want something a little bit more significant than, say, recon intel on some random core unit, which makes Hope a relatively okay card that's just kind of an afterthought for when you're building your list. But after Hope, we are going to have our final light side power here, and that is going to be the Jedi Mind Trick. And this one is just kind of a dud. It's a 5-point exhaustible card that is going to allow you to make a free action to put 2 suppression tokens onto an enemy trooper unit at range 1 to 2, so long as they are not an operative or commander. And once again, this card is inexhaustible, and there is just far better cards to use your Master of the Force to untap every turn. But what really does this card in is the fact that it is a light side upgrade only, and as things stand, neither the Republic or the Rebels have a whole lot of suppression options, which greatly devalues this card when you compare it alongside something like Fear that would appear in a suppression-heavy faction such as the Imperials. And if you look at the artwork on this card, it kind of does exemplify how this card was intended to be used. It's Obi-Wan Kenobi snooping around in the Death Star, tricking some wayward soldiers so he can outwit and outmaneuver them. And in theory, this would work out perfectly in the game to represent this. If your Jedi was on the far flank of the board and he ran into a lone trooper units, he could tap this card and take away one of their activations, or perhaps even make them panic. But as we all know, very few games of Legion actually play out like that, and if those troopers that you trick are far enough away from their commander to not benefit from their courage, that means your commander is probably too far away from your troops also. So overall, your Jedi is not a bark speeder. He's not going to be zipping up the flank to get around your enemies and dupe them. He's likely going to be in the middle of the main fight, where your enemies and his commanders will be close enough to bolster and deflect something as insignificant as 2 random suppression tokens. So until I see more suppression keywords pop up in a faction like the Republic, Jedi Mind Trick is going to be a highly dismissible card. But that will bring us along to our final card, which of course is going to be Saber Throw, and at 5 points, Saber Throw is going to allow you to make a ranged attack at range 1 to 2, using half of your Saber's dice, rounding up. And this is just a very solid upgrade for a melee character to have, one that will rightfully put Saber Throw at S tier ranking. One of the biggest drawbacks of most brawler Jedi is the fact that they have to get up close and personal before they can start dealing real damage. but this will give your Jedi a ranged attack that's going to make a lot of trooper units way more scared to come near them. And should you run thin on troopers and need your hero to capture an objective, he can comfortably do that and still throw that lightsaber to dish out damage to nearby enemies. On top of that, I want to mention that it's very generous that we can round our attacks up, as lots of Jedi do have 5 dice in their attack pool, meaning you will be able to make a ranged attack with 3 dice, which are often red and accompanied by a respectable amount of pierce. And after playing enough games against someone like General Veers, I've come to learn that even a weapon with white dice and pierce can be pretty devastating in the late game where every model counts. So don't think that just because you're having your dice pool, you're reducing your efficiency here, as you will usually have more dice than you will have the pierce keyword, and at the end of the day, rolling half of your attack pool's dice is still more than rolling 0 of them because you can't reach your opponents. Also, this is one of the best upgrade cards that is not exhaustible, meaning it will not compete with other cards, such as Force Reflexes, which makes it all the more universal and useful on a ton of Jedi heroes. And that will wrap up our Force Power tier ranking. As I've stated before, this is one of the best upgrade slots in Star Wars Legion, with a ton of great options here, and even some of the lower ranking ones would be phenomenal if they were placed in something like Training or Command, but it's just such an expensive and rare upgrade slot that their utility does kind of fall by the wayside. But let me know what you guys think about this ranking in the comments below. Are there any cards you think I ranked too high or too low? Are there any interesting combos I missed on certain Jedi? And what do you guys like to run on your Jedi? What are your staple Force upgrades? But as always, if you guys like the video and you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and until next time, take care.